Today, I'm talking about the coral from 6-0 Pickleball. The coral is being released at $200, but you can take 10% off using code SSPBC. It comes in 3 colors, the blue, also pink and black, and in 3 shapes, elongated, hybrid, and wide body. It comes with a 12-month warranty. You can see from the specs that the paddles have standard measurements for their shapes. I obtained the hybrid shape, and my measurements were a stock weight of 8.13 ounces, swing weight of 112, twist weight of 6.65, and it measured 16.2 by 7.7 inches. Now I put weight at 3 and 9, 4.5 grams, and added 1 overgrip. This brought my weight to 8.6 ounces, swing weight to 118, twist weight to 7.5, and balance point to 236. For me, this unlocked some extra power and stability while remaining a maneuverable paddle. Let's look at the imaging and talk about construction. Special thanks to my friends at Sulphur Springs Imaging for the X-ray and CT scan of the paddle.
Okay, let's look at the X-ray of the coral here, and right away you can see the very distinct and different layers of foam that we see within here coming all the way down into the handle. If we start with the handle, you can see where these little silicone stabilizers are in there, and this is done for vibration dampening. And if I zoom in on that, you can kind of see where these 3 are, very similar to the black opal. You can also see that this layer of foam comes directly down into the handle and kind of comes up all the way around. And you can see this layer comes down in as well that encircles the paddle. And I'll show the diagram of the construction on my review as well. But if we follow these foam layers up, you'll see that there's a central foam. That's this layer here. And then a surrounding layer of foam that comes almost all the way around, but you can see here it falls short right there in the middle. Now this is curious. I don't think that they've described why that's the case, but if we measure the distance between those, that's roughly 3.5 centimeters. So that's interesting that they leave that much of a gap with this concentric foam layer. Now the other thing of note, they call this the tectonic core, because this core has cuts within there, both horizontally and vertically. And I think you can kind of see that here. I'm going to zoom in and let's see. Yep, you can see sort of these lines here and these lines here. Now this is supposed to be throughout the entire central area, and I can just faintly see the lines here and lines here and line here in this denser foam. And then you can, when you look at it under this magnification, I wonder if I can get in even more. I think that's probably maxed out. Yep. You can see, you can kind of see how the indentions in the foam works in. So you see this clearly layer here, this layer, and this layer, you can tell it looks to be the same material. And then it looks like there's another layer here, although this is the edge guard, so that may just be the edge guard covering up this layer, and that may be the case. So the thickness of this foam is roughly 8 to 9 millimeters, and then if this one may come up to right about there. Okay, about 8 millimeters. So that may be the same or maybe a little different depending on the measurements there. But let's come out. But you can see how that works. So this foam comes all the way around. And then, of course, this one stops short right here. And then this layer right here. And I'm going to zoom in on the corner to see if I can see how this layer comes through. And if that is just one piece, and I think that it is. Okay, so this brings me to the other interesting point, is that this layer is, or this area right here is extremely dense. That's why it's very white on X-ray. And so this may be some internal weighting. This isn't in their diagram on the website of the construction of the coral. So I don't know if they've disclosed what this is. I don't know if this is tungsten or another type of metal, such as lead, or even like a dense fiberglass that sometimes paddle makers will use to add some internal weighting. But it looks like they have a little weighting at 4 and 8 o'clock, presumably for stability. But other than that, this is a very clean x-ray and a very well put together paddle. A lot of details into the construction on here, and I'm a big fan of all the innovations that 60 has put in here. All right, let's take a look at the CT scan of the coral, and you can see here from coronal imaging, this is similar to the x-ray, but I can scan through the paddle. You can see the handle here, and then I come through the paddle. Look at that tectonic core, and you can see these cuts into the foam. I think it's a little bit more obvious right here, but you can see that, and it goes throughout the paddle face. Now, note, you noticed on the x-ray, I pointed out this 3.5 centimeter gap. I thought maybe this was just the construction and a design for the coral. But I saw x-rays from some other reviewers where this came all the way through. And that was the same on whether it was the hybrid, elongated, or wide body. So then I wondered if it was just me that got a coral that just had a gap like this, but I did see some other x-rays of reviewers that had a very similar gap. I did reach out to 60, but I did not get a response on why this might be the case. Now, the good news is I did not notice any change in performance or any dead areas on this part of the paddle. So I think that this is just a one-off, or it doesn't really affect the paddle playability. But it is interesting to note that this ring of foam on my paddle and some of the others, maybe a certain batch, did not come all the way across, but that is not universal to the construction of the coral. You can see the weighting here like we saw on the x-ray as we scan through the paddle. And as I scan all the way through, you can see that the cuts are there. Now if I scan back through the middle of the paddle, you see the cuts are not there. So these cuts do not go all the way through the foam. They're just on each side. Okay, now we're looking for sagittal cuts into the paddle here. This is the bed of the CT scanner. This is where the paddle starts to show up. And as we scan through the sides here, you can see this bright or dense area here. On x-ray, this means this is thicker. And this is that internal weighting at 4 and 8 that we saw on the x-rays and on the coronal the views of the CT scan. As we scan through, you can see where the edge guard is up here, and the foam layers here, and the little gap in the foam layers come in through here. This is that one ring that surrounds the main core. You can see that EVA foam with the EPP foam inside. The EPP foam is a little denser. And as we scan through there, let's stop and take a measurement. You can see that this is a 16 millimeter core. We're rounding up here. And we get into the handle. You can see those silicone shock absorbers in here. Now let's zoom in. And see. I'm sorry, it gets grainy, but when you zoom in, it gets grainier. It's hard to really see the cuts into the core on max zoom here. Maybe a little bit right here, maybe right here. If you saw my review of the charm, you can see those a little bit more clear. And then we look at the paddle in this view. Again, I have this zoomed in a little bit here. Once again, it's hard to see where the cuts are. I do not think they're very deep, but we clearly could see those on the coronal imaging. I think you can see just a little bit here. So I don't think they have a significant depth into the foam. There's a few areas here where you can slightly start to see lines in there. This is the foam. Of course, these are the paddle face layers here. There's not fiberglass in this paddle. These are just a couple layers of carbon. I believe it's 2, and maybe 3. I'll have to go back and look at those specs. And again, the handle, you can see it's the foam core in there.
So how does it play? First and foremost, you can tell it is a foam paddle. It has that muted, soft feel with good dwell on full swings. It plays in the all-court category, but I really enjoyed the power increase when the weight was added at 3 and 9. It shapes the ball very well with above average spin production. The diamond tough surface with the nice dwell really seems to give good spin both on drives and drops. The dwell is reminiscent of the Pickleball Ape's charm, and it is likely not a coincidence that both have cuts into that foam layer. The sweet spot is average to me, not big or small, with no noticeable dead spots. The missing foam I saw on X-ray did not seem to have an impact on performance. Pop is fine, not bad really, but you do notice a lack of fiberglass. For those that don't like that fiberglass feel, but want a decent amount of pop, I think you'll be good here. It's not boomstick level of pop, but there's enough for kitchen putaways. For comparisons, this paddle falls in line with the aforementioned Pickleball Ape's Charm and the Honolulu Pickleball FC Plus line. These are all very solid paddles. So take your pick here. I really liked playing the Coral, but my review is a little limited as I've only had the Hybrid to compare. Power-wise, the Coral may have a slight advantage here. For touch, the Ape's Charm may be a little bit better. For cost, the FC Plus is ever so slightly better, and I might like their shape options just a bit better. Bottom line, this is a tight trio here, and the subtle differences are up to you. However, if you are looking for longevity, and the diamond tough surface ends up backing up its claim of 4 times the life of regular grit, this will be a hard paddle to pass up. Final thought. I could take this paddle to a tournament any day and feel great with it. I think nearly any level of player would feel comfortable with this paddle. For $180 after code, it is a very solid buy. And definitely has my recommendation. I hope you like this. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. That helps me out a lot. Give me a like, follow, share, all the things. Y'all take care. Peace.